Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're connecting from. I'm Kumi Kitamori, OECD Deputy Director for Environment, and together with my colleagues from the OECD Secretariat, warm welcome to this Green Talk Live to discuss today measuring progress in adapting to a changing climate. So let's hope to see there are enough participants in the room. But we are very happy to be joined today by excellent speakers with us. Now, a little bit of context for today's theme. We are seeing increasing evidence that more and more accelerated climate adaptation action is needed to protect our communities, the environment, and our economies from the detrimental impacts of the changing climate. Now, at the OECD, in response to this, OECD member countries and an increasing number of countries globally have adopted national adaptation policies. But implementation progress is unfortunately slow and rather difficult to demonstrate. Now, adaptation is a complex policy domain spanning almost all areas of policymaking, from national to local governments. So in this context, measuring the progress that countries are making in building climate resilience is challenging. But it's very important to improve our understanding of the effectiveness of policies. And this is key to make more efficient use of resources to achieve our adaptation goals. So demonstrating tangible adaptation progress will increase efficiency, effectiveness, transparency, and accountability. And so therefore can also help to give adaptation the political momentum that has long been needed. At the OECD, in the last few years, we have been working hard with countries to improve measuring progress in the adaptation area. We are pleased to present and discuss the findings of our latest report with you. And it's called Measuring Progress in Adapting to a Changing Climate, which I warmly invite everybody to read. And I think the link to this report is already there in the chat or will be shared with you very soon. Now, just let me share some insights from this report that we'll be talking about. This report clearly shows that measurement is a priority, as OECD countries have set up mechanisms to assess implementation progress of their national adaptation policy at sectoral and subnational levels. Much of this reporting, however, remains limited to documenting outputs, rather than really understanding whether adaptation efforts ultimately lead to reducing climate vulnerability. There is a set of data and information needed to grasp such policy impacts, and the data requirements are significant, including complex scientific information, as well as social and economic data. Now, harmonizing and aggregating this multidimensional information is just as complex. So this work is timely and relevant both at the national, but also international levels. To advance on the global goal on adaptation that was initially established in 2015, as part of our Paris Agreement, countries now adopted adaptation targets as part of the framework for global climate resilience at COP28 last year. Now, discussions will continue on the selection of indicators to assess progress towards this global goal on adaptation. So for today's discussion, we are very lucky to have a panel of experts that we have invited from the United Kingdom, Chile, and Korea, who have helped to make substantial progress in their country's measurement agenda for adaptation. We would like to discuss with them what this progress entailed and how this can inspire other countries, and also how existing challenges may be overcome by working together internationally. Now, to kick off our discussion today, our colleague Michaela Rambali, she is the policy analyst at the OECD Environment Directorate, and she's also the lead author of the report that I just described. She will present the key findings from this report And then after that, we will turn to our invited guest panelists to provide their views on the results and their experience with us through this project. Now, I would like to introduce them. Please join us in welcoming them. First, Gladys Santis. She's adaptation officer for the Chilean Ministry of Environment, where she leads the development and reporting on Chile's, her country's national adaptation plan. She is also a very experienced negotiator on all issues related to climate adaptation. Now we are also joined by Miriam Kennedy. Thanks for joining us. She's a lead analyst on adaptation at the Climate Change Committee, also known as CCC, of the UK government, its independent advisory body on climate change. Now, since joining CCC, Miriam has led the development of a revised adaptation monitoring framework to measure progress on adaptation across the UK. And last but not least, we are also joined by Dr. Hoon Chang. He's the Director General for the Climate and Air Quality Research Group at the Korean Environmental Institute. Previously, he was the director of the Korean Adaptation Center for Climate Change. This is where he spearheaded the development of the adaptation indicators that are currently being used in Korea for the national policy context. And he also helped us with the reviewing of the report that we are talking about today. So after this intervention, then we'll open the floor to all of you online today. So please feel free to type in and send your questions to all the panelists through the chat function on the Zoom that you see on the screen. And we'll try to round them up and try to get to your questions and address them as much as we can. So again, thanks for joining us. And without further ado, let me give the floor to Michaela to present this report. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Kumi. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to present today this new OECD report on measuring progress in adapting to a changing climate. It is based on a cross-country survey that we carried out in OECD and a selected number of partner countries, as well as this series of case studies showcasing the experience from the UK, Korea, Chile, as well as the Slovak Republic. This report takes stock of the extent and the way that countries measure and understand whether the actions they are implementing are effective in reducing climate risk. It brings together examples that can help increase accountability and inform future adaptation actions, which I hope will be of use as countries ramp up their adaptation efforts. So since quite recently, all OECD countries now have a national adaptation policy in place, either a strategy or plan or both. And with more and more countries now having a decade of experience with implementing adaptation policies or revising them, it is now key to look at this question of measurement. While most OECD countries include, so about 83% of countries include a specific section referred to as monitoring and evaluation in their national adaptation plan, only half of OECD countries have developed either progress or evaluation reports so far. Without any exception, these documents tell us that the adaptation gap is growing between climate risk and the efforts at the national at the national level, and that efforts need to be scaled up. And that despite the increasing number of objectives and targets and actions put in place on the ground, countries struggle to demonstrate progress towards them because data and information requirements to grasp progress are significant. Aggregating information from different data owners and levels of action is and remains challenging, as is demonstrating the clear links between policy action and the resilience building. So how do countries actually measure progress on adaptation? I'll now highlight some areas across the adaptation policy cycle that we've looked at in the report, where countries are focusing their efforts, but where a lot more needs to be done, building on the survey and the case study results. So firstly, understanding progress starts with building a robust baseline against which progress can be measured. And and understand whether they're making progress in reducing climate risk. Countries are improving their baseline with regular climate risk assessment, and the survey showed that 81% of the country responded to have developed either a national or sectoral climate risk assessment. But these vary in terms of coverage and also in terms of quality. The assessment of observed hazards, such as floods, drought, is quite a common practice among countries, but there remain gaps in measuring exposure levels. So, and understanding the degree to which either the assets, the ecosystem, or the communities of the countries are exposed to climate hazard. The same goes for vulnerability level. Countries have difficulties identifying the socioeconomic factors that make people more susceptible to climate impacts. And some countries are trying to identify this vulnerability level, either using qualitative description or you'll see in the case study of the Slovak Republic, using quantitative indicators. But overall, there remain gaps in measuring the observed climate impact, for which it would be key to have long-term trends, to have, for example, the information on the annual damage from flooding, the agricultural losses from drought, to be able to disentangle the influence of climate change and of adaptation action. Countries need, therefore, to continue conducting and improving the climate risk assessment with information across multiple geographies and time scales. Secondly, moving to the definition of adaptation objective, which is core of the adaptation policy cycle. While the majority of responding countries stated that their climate risk assessment do inform the objective setting process, many objectives and targets remain generic and are not specific enough to be measurable. You can see here one example on the slide. There are actually less than half of the responding countries that include a time frame for all of their objectives. And fewer, actually around 30% of responding countries have associated this objective with indicators, but a bit more are intending to use indicators in the future. So for objectives to be measurable, it is important that they reflect the climate risk that they are associated with and that they aim to reduce, that they are specific enough to apply either to a sector or a specific geographic area, or an action that they are and an objective they are required to achieve, that they set a baseline, a time frame for achieving this objective, and last but not least, that they are linked to a specific target, that the overall objective, such as becoming climate resilient countries, is associated with clear targets and actions to be able to track progress. And together, the objective help illustrate what a well-adapted country would look like. So thirdly, countries have a growing experience in tracking and the status of implementation of action as part of their national or sectoral adaptation plan. Nearly 3/4 of the responding countries report to measure the outputs of a policy, and so the direct results that are achieved by the policy. And this help appreciate whether an action, so it could be a regulation, a plan, a physical adaptation measure, or institutional change that have been implemented, whether it has been completed within a set time frame and within a set budget. Some countries are also relying on specific tools to facilitate this tracking process. In the UK, the NAP monitoring tracker tools demonstrated that the action progress helped to demonstrate the action progress status. So if they were on track, off track, or delivered, to monitor the implementation of over 200 measures that were set out in the second national adaptation program. In France as well, the implementation progress of over 200 NAP action was monitored as a percentage progress towards completion. And alongside the planned action, the resources that are engaged to enable the implementation, so either expressed as staff time or as financial resources that are allocated, are also sometimes tracked, with actually over 60% of the responding countries that have stated to track the resources for the implementation of action. However, the plan level and the source of the finance is rarely integrated in the adaptation planning document, which would be helpful to determine whether the resource engaged for adaptation are efficiently and effectively used. So, but as some of you may know, the ultimate objective of adaptation measurement is really to understand whether the implementation of adaptation action has helped reduce the exposure and vulnerability of the country to the impacts of climate change. And this is the most complex step in measurement, as it seeks to establish a causal link between the actions that are implemented and the level of resilience that is achieved. While about a third of the responding countries state to assess and to measure the policy impact, they mainly measure the change in the level of climate impact without assessing whether it's thanks to the policy implemented. So therefore, the report highlights that and identifies a few approaches that countries have used to overcome this challenge of attribution and as a way to shed light on the effectiveness of measures. So some countries developed are using a theory of change approach to be able to map out how the resource engaged for implementing the action lead to certain long-term impact. And it's a way to qualitatively identify which part of the impact can be attributed to the action. And you'll find a bit more about this in the UK and the Chile case study. There are also a number of countries that have highlighted the importance of relying on expert consultation as well as stakeholder engagement to be able to establish this attribution effect. Finland, for example, asked questions to government officials as well as independent experts. Korea goes a step further to also engage a citizen engagement group to identify and assess this level of effectiveness of actions. And finally, there's also effectiveness that has been statistically assessed with quantitative impact evaluation methods. But to date, however, this assessment are predominantly undertaken by academia at the project level. And you'll see a few examples, notably around measures against heat wave in our report. So against the backdrop of the policy cycle, having a strong enabling environment for measurement is also key. An increasing number of countries, and we reviewed 12 of them in our report, have institutionalized adaptation measurement in their climate change law, notably with the mandate to measure progress and sometimes also including the requirement to assess effectiveness. And more institutions, as a result, institution and organization are involved in adaptation measurement from a range of sectoral ministries, but also audited office or local authorities. And this is important to strengthen ownership over the results and develop a conducive institutional framework for measurement. However, and it's quite standard to see that the technical and financial resources are not always appropriate nor sufficient to measure adaptation progress comprehensively as well as regularly. Last but not least, the survey showed that a large share of respondents indicated that the results are informing adaptation policy making. But however, the lessons learned are not always clear, and this step actually suffers from a strong institutional turnover, which challenge the use of the results in future policy making. And this can really be a missed opportunity to reinforce accountability, transparency, and make sure that the resources are efficiently deployed in future adaptation policies. So to conclude, this report responds to a very strong country demand from countries to address the challenges of adaptation measurement and take stock of where countries are at. You'll find many more examples, both from OECD countries, but also including from the UK, Chile, Korea, and Slovak Republic, which I invite you to have a look at. And I take this opportunity to thank all the survey respondents and the experts who were involved in the report and the case studies. Our team will be continuing addressing this question, in particular the question of the development and the use of adaptation indicators that are most relevant to assess progress in our future work. So please stay tuned. And I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much, Michaela, for just highlighting the key aspects from this latest report from the OECD. So again, you know, it's very, very complex and challenging in terms of the measurement agenda, from the baseline of hazard and vulnerability exposure to the objectives in the national government policy context, but also beyond that, implementation and whether the implementation is having the impact, the ultimate outcome, which is to build and improve resilience, is happening or not. So thank you. Now let us turn to Gladys. As we know, climate change adaptation is vital to preserving the natural environment and the well-being of countries and communities, and also the future resources for economic activities. Now, Chile has not only developed advanced adaptation policies, but also actively improved the evidence base to inform policymaking and address the effectiveness of the country's adaptation actions. So could you tell us briefly, for the audience online today, what Chile has achieved so far and your future ambitions, and what other countries should do to follow your footsteps? Over to you, Gladys.
Thank you very much, Kumi. And I would like to thank the OECD also for giving us this opportunity to document our case, the Chilean case, and showcase the progress and challenges in our country. So I will try to answer the question. It's difficult to say what to do to follow our steps, but maybe our experience can help some to take some of that. So, well, in Chile, we have a framework climate change law since 2022. I would like to set the framework in our country first to understand how we have advanced in adaptation measuring progress in adaptation. So this law sets the goal of achieving resilience by 2050, along with the carbon neutrality. So, however, Chile has been working on adaptation policies long before that, but today the law reinforces what we were already doing and establishes that we must develop 12 sectoral adaptation plans with prioritized sectors like health, agriculture, biodiversity, water resources, etc. But the law also instructs the regional and local governments in Chile to develop climate change action plans that include adaptation. So this framework is quite favorable, but it presents a challenge. As from the central government, we find ourselves in needing to build capacities in all these levels to support these policies. But the law also mandates the establishment of an open and transparent information system that is accessible to everyone, to all citizens, and reports on climate change progress to the Congress, to the Chilean Congress, every 2 years, in line with the presentation of the PTRs to the UNFCCC. So this information system includes an adaptation platform, which, among other things, should integrate the progress in all the sets of plans, the local, the regional, and the sectoral adaptation plans. And also our NAP. We have a NAP that is a global policy, a cross-cutting policy. The sectoral plans, they like go in parallel. Every ministry develops its plan and it has its own time. Regarding the information system, so this should integrate the progress in all these plans, and as well as the risk maps that we currently keep in an atlas. We call it ARCLIM, which is a climate risk atlas in Spanish. This is online, and here I will get a little more into detail with the specific questions. This atlas identifies 62 climate hazards up to date across thematic areas, among them like heat, cold, precipitation, wind, humidity, etc., with a baseline period 1980-2010, and the future hazard projection for 2035 and 2065 under the SSP5 8.5 scenario of the 6th assessment report of the IPCC. So we have climate risk indices at a national and local level that were built based on a consensus between the sectoral actors and the scientific community. We have a big community of scientists, universities, independent institutes that took part in this elaboration of this atlas. And the atlas uses the methodology of the impact chain. Currently, it estimates risk values for 18 impact chains in 12 sectors. What else? Well, this assessment, they have helped us to prioritize adaptation action, you know, and the tool has been well received by the public services, although not all risks are reflected in the tool, and we need to improve it. Also, we are developing a methodology to assess risks in investment projects that enter our public investment system from the Ministry of Social Development, in some countries is the Ministry of Planning, so that the projects can incorporate adaptation action according to those risks, and we are developing indicators in that sense using this risk map. And today we face well, that's like the bigger view, you know, to what are we doing. But we face several challenges. First is to continually update and expand this information. While the tool has proven to be useful, significant improvements are needed, not only to use as a basis for the public policy, but also to account for the impacts of these public policies. That's the tricky part. In this regard, we are updating the National Adaptation Plan right now. It's in public consultation. And the NAP, we have incorporated there a series of measures to improve our monitoring, evaluation, and learning system for adaptation. First, we have improvements to incorporate more information to this platform. There is atlas, such as updated projections, other impact chains, also improvements in visualization to make it more user-friendly, particularly for subnational governments, for local governments, because we believe that at the national level role today in our country, in this regard, we have the law already. So we have mandated these plans, all these set of plans. So our role is more to give the tools to the localities, to build capacity in the localities, to give them the elements so they can build their own policies. And so we are focusing our efforts in that regard. Where secondly, we are systematizing the monitoring system, which will be part of this open information system that I talk about, that is established by law. In that information system, we will have all the reporting of the 12 sectors, the regions in Chile, the subnational governments, that is 16 regions, and the local governments are 346 municipalities. So we will have all those reporting of the plans in there in an integrated platform. The national plan also includes a gender and intersectionality approach. It's very new for us, this, and we were working hard on that, with measures to deepen knowledge in this area, to generate indicators to be used to assess vulnerability with an intersectional view that can be used in public policies. The map also includes guidelines for sectoral plans regarding the incorporation of this in intersectionality and gender approaches, and also for disaster risk management, nature-based solutions, water security, and adaptation. Let me see what else. And also, additionally, there are measures to work with the 12 sectors to understand what resilience means, because we have this goal to achieve resilience by 2050 in our climate change law. So we will start to develop our work with the sectors to understand what resilience means for each sector, for agriculture, for infrastructure, for water resources, etc., and identify indicators and indices and advance in that area and defining what we understand to achieve resilience and how to evaluate in each iteration of the NAP and also the sectoral plans, what we get so far, because adaptation is a cycle, so it's step by step, and you are learning from the previous part. So this is the most important and challenging part, because we are talking here about effectiveness of adaptation. When we talk about resilience, did we achieve resilience? We are talking about effectiveness. So that's the tricky part. And finally, and I end with this, so we have also a measure in our national adaptation plan to build an inventory of impacts. This is what we aim with this is to have clarity on the impacts that have been caused by the climate change, including losses and damages. For this, we need to develop methodologies. We need to agree with all the national actors of different sectors on the methodologies and the information, and then to populate this inventory. And this presents a great coordination challenge, particularly for the public sector. And also this inventory also includes creating a community of practice, inviting other countries, to share their experiences and to share and to see what they are doing in their countries. But this idea is not only looking at the past. We do not only want to look at the past and what already happened, but to learn from experience. So this is very, for us, it's something that we don't know if we can achieve this, but we put this measure in there now, because the idea is also having information for the future. So to see the cost of inaction, and that this tool in the future could serve us to measure how adaptation could be used to reduce those impacts, like testing different measures and their impacts, and how they can better understand how we can advance with adaptation. So it's a significant challenge and it's very ambitious. So I leave it there, and thank you very much. And I will be very glad to answer any question you have.
Thank you so much, Gladys, for giving us the details. And there may well be, as you said, questions from the floor, and then hopefully event like this is helping to precisely exchange information, how other countries are doing. So let us now turn to Miriam to share with us the experience from the UK, the country's effort in understanding and documenting and improving progress in the country's climate change adaptation effort. And in that regard, your organization, CCC, is among the first agencies to develop measurable indicator and targets for climate adaptation, and in collaboration with a wide range of stakeholders. Gladys talked a little bit about that, how that's being done in Chile. But maybe, Miriam, could you briefly describe the process to this audience today online, and tell us how you think the UK's approach might be further be evolving? Over to you, Miriam.
Thanks very much, and thanks for this opportunity. It's great to see the report published and to learn from other countries as well. So the Climate Change Committee in the UK, we have a legal obligation to measure progress on adaptation. Every 2 years, we publish a progress report. So we've been thinking about this challenge for a long time, since we were set up in 2008. But last year we went through a process of evolving our monitoring and evaluation framework to update it. And as part of that, we introduced this new framework, which includes what we're calling monitoring maps. And they act as a kind of a theory of change, like Michaela mentioned. So across 13 different areas of adaptation that we look at, so things like health and community response and different types of infrastructure and so on. And for each of those areas, the monitoring map identifies a goal for that area and then a series of adaptation outcomes. And then the key policies and plans that the committee believes need to be in place to achieve those adaptation outcomes. But we also look at things that are outside of direct government control. So we look at what we call enabling factors. So things that need to be happening elsewhere in order to achieve those outcomes. And finally, we also consider kind of additional contextual factors. So things that probably no one really has any control over, but that will influence whether we meet those adaptation outcomes or how big that challenge might be. So that's things like how the population is aging or where people live and so on. So all of those different pieces come together for us to understand how well we're achieving those adaptation outcomes. And that was so important for us to establish that framework. And then when we look at indicators that we use currently and that we hope to use in the future as well, that helps us to describe why are we measuring these things. So is it measuring at the outcome level, or is it measuring something that's happening at more of an input and policy and planning level? And what do we think those indicators are showing us? How is it explaining how we're moving towards those adaptation outcomes? So we developed those monitoring maps and then the indicators that sit within them with some of our key stakeholders. So with the government departments that we work with different government agencies who have responsibility for implementing adaptation actions on the ground. And in some cases, we worked with non-governmental organizations as well, who understand what's happening really at that ground level, how things are changing, and often have some of that data that's really useful for us to understand how close we are to those adaptation outcomes. So part of the reason for doing that was to ensure that we're not missing any key indicators or data, but also to make sure that this broad group of stakeholders agreed with the logic behind the theory of change and the monitoring maps. And so, of course, there's still many gaps in the indicators that we use, but we've also, through this process, identified the types of indicators that we would like to have in future. So where we see those gaps, what kind of data we think is feasible to collect to understand those different parts of the maps, and where we don't have data around different outcomes, what we might like to see. I think in the future, we would absolutely like to make the outcomes and the targets increasingly quantifiable. So we have tried to be very specific with them as much as possible. And that's one of the challenges that Michaela identified in the report and in the presentation, that the more specific you can be, the easier it is to measure these things. And so we'd like to put more quantifiable goals within the different adaptation areas. So thinking about how much resilience we can expect to see, and by when as well, can we put target dates on things as well. So we're working on that now internally across a few areas. So for example, if we are adapting to heat waves in the future, how do we measure those outcomes at the national level? Is it through looking at health outcomes or looking at avoided mortality? And can we put numbers around those things so we're not just measuring trends? So I think the more specific and quantified we can be, the more we'll be able to track progress, and that it'll be a kind of meaningful tracking for us to hold government to account on adaptation, but also to understand where perhaps the policies and plans that are in place that have the best intentions are maybe not as effective as we thought they might be when they were first introduced. So all of that is so important for the overall learning on adaptation and understanding how far we've come along that road. So yeah, lots of exciting plans to keep evolving the framework in the future. But we're pleased with the initial monitoring maps and theory of change that we have in place now, that I think will be with us for a while and will stand the test of time as we make more progress in future.
Great, thank you so much, Miriam. And it's already quite elaborate, but to do this every 2 years. So, you know, as Gladys mentioned, capacity issues as well for all stakeholders involved. So that's very interesting. Thank you. And I'm sure there'll be questions. But let us now turn to Hoon. So Korea has set up a robust adaptation policy process and planning cycle with mandatory reporting, similarly to what we heard so far on the results of these plans. And because of this, over the past decade, Korea has built and refined indicators and measures for adaptation progress over time. So what are the key achievements in your country, Hoon? And what were the key factors behind this success, if we may? If you could also touch on where you see potential evolution going forward, and what will this require to ensure ongoing continuous improvements? So over to you. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Kumi. I don't know, I can finish, trying to answer all those questions in given time, but anyway, I'm trying to, answer for the questions. Anyway, thank you OECD for inviting me for this the webinar to share our experience, and also the report the Becca mentioned is kind of report you should read and referencing how the other countries are doing in adaptation strategy. Again, this is that is the wonderful piece of work by OECD, and also thank you again for giving us a chance to contributing in our experiences. Korea is, I think, one of the leading countries in adaptation, in the area, especially the national adaptation strategies. We started in our adaptation since 2009, which means now we have over 15 years of experience that we can share. And like that just Kumi mentioned, that we have very strong and a very systematic framework of adaptation, the processes. This is also based on our very strong law, which called the low carbon and green growth law. I'm going to actually talk about this again and later. And this year, we also experience we kind of reaching the end of the cycle of adaptation. So we already started to risk assessment for the next phase, and also hopefully next year we're going to set up for next year's fourth cycle of adaptation strategies. And very happily, again, I talked to you before that our the law. We hopefully this year we're going to establish new law about specifically on adaptation law, which includes all the adaptation programs of work, and also what kind of information we need and what kind of works have to be done by the ministries and also all stakeholders. So this is very happy news for us, especially very heavily working on the adaptation area. So this is kind of our key achievement, one of the key achievements. The other thing, achievements, I can mention a lot of different, hundreds of different key achievements. But the one thing is, we try to incorporate the mainstreaming the climate change adaptation into all the development processes. So since last year, we incorporated the climate change impact assessment into the whole stages of development processes to consider our future climate risk and their adverse impacts. This is also that we have the mandate that all the development processes should be run the climate change impact assessment, and then we have to review by experts, which is mostly colleagues from our the Korea Environment Institute. So this is very strong the process of how we can mainstreaming the climate adaptation concept, and also we're trying to incorporate the ICT and AI to the adaptation project. And for example, like we have a different now patterns of precipitation. Rains, and also landslides and other disasters. So we put in a lot of different sensors, and also we trying to get the information, the data information, into the put in the computer system. So ICT actually checked the near real time. And then they just give out some the emergency the messages to the public, and also to the departments of the government what the people in need. So we try to incorporate all the different highest technologies to to advance early warning systems in mostly flooding and also landslides and other areas. So that's kind of one of key achievement. We're still developing, but we're trying to incorporate ICT and the AI technologies. And then finally, the key, one of the key achievement is already the Michaela mentioned that we trying to include all the public participations, especially in the assessment processes. So, and even though public can also participate in developing their adaptation project, well, it could be done by the national or some national level, but still they can have some kind of comments, and they can give us some like a pilot studies or pilot things by the public, and then they also can assess all the different adaptation project done by the government. So this is kind of our new the actions, and also it's already done by. I mean, it's already run the last 3 years. So that's kind of our key achievement from the 5-year cycle. Now, how can we evolve this? Well, we have many things to actually work left in the adaptation area. The first thing is how can you identify the risk and vulnerability? Now you can see the disaster is kind of like a very complex, sometimes compound complex. So we're trying to now study about how you can study like for example, like in the floods and landslide. I mean, it's all combined. So in how we can the study and how you can actually give some early warning systems, or say so I mean we have to developing mapping systems and so gathering information systems to study about a multiple and complex risk and the vulnerability studies. And also just like the UK mentioned that what are the kind of key indicators checked by the performances, adaptation performances done by the national and sub-national government. This is also kind of very challenging for us. But again, all the different sensors, all the different monitoring by ICT AI, also they have a very great data and the information, so we can probably help us to develop some very strong indicators by sectors, and also we also develop the indicators by the stakeholders, at national level or sub-national level, about the risk and the vulnerabilities. But we still have some kind of challenging fields, especially the locally led program, because we also found that there still needs to improve the capacity to assessing the risk and also vulnerability, even developing the policies in adaptation policies. And also now we are starting to develop some financial mechanism system, specifically in the climate change, not the adaptation, but the climate change area, which is we called the low carbon tagging the budget systems. We just started. So some of the governments, make their budget the systems, and then we try to tagging what kind of the works is actually contributed to the mitigation. But now we also started thinking about how can the adaptation area and put it in the data tagging the financial systems. So that's kind of challenge left for us. So we, all different my KA colleagues still doing research, and also working very closely with the Ministry of Environment and other ministries, trying to develop our policies. Yeah, I'm trying to make it short. So just kind of very brief things about our achievement and also about the futures. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hoon, and particularly interesting to me, use of AI, for example, all the technology. So that's a very interesting example to consider. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, all the panelists. We actually have quite a few questions that came from the audience. So maybe let me turn to, we have about 15 minutes. Maybe we can squeeze in 15 minutes. We have to address some questions. So maybe you could be really quick in your answers. First one is actually for Chile, Gladys. Have you implemented any specific technology tools, similar in this case, such as dashboard, database, formula, and other online tools for inputting data, and then also for data visualization? So that's a very specific question. If you could be very short on answer, so we can go to others as well.
Thank you, Kumi, and thank you for the question. I'm not the expert on the platform and how does it work. But really is not, it is, I understand it's a traditional platform, you know, with nothing in particular or special. So we have the risk maps there, but for us, the important thing was the methodology that was developed to develop those climate, those impact change, you know. So nothing so up to date or cutting edge technology, but yes, it works for us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Next question, I think that's for Miriam. So how can satellite-derived data integrate into existing national and subnational climate adaptation monitoring framework to improve the accuracy and granularity of climate risk assessment? So that's a question on the UK case. Again, quick, short answer.
Thanks. Yeah, we do sometimes use some satellite-derived data for things like talking about like green coverage and tree coverage, particularly in urban areas, which can help with reducing the urban heat island effect and understanding how our natural environment is changing and being affected by climate change and perhaps adapting itself. Sometimes the challenge with those things is that the change over time is quite a slow trend. So you might not see big changes between 2 years to 2 years, but definitely can be useful for us to look at those pieces of data as well as the things that we can collect ourselves from being on the ground.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for that. So we had 2 more technology related questions in a row. Next question. See, I'm trying to squint my eyes. Oh, that's for Michaela. Could you please make some examples of good objectives that are quantifiable, you talked about, and indicate objective indicators, and some are still, and what are examples of some that are still not satisfactory in terms of quantifiability?
Thanks for the question. So I think I gave a few examples of a good objective, but what is very important in practice is that the objective is really owned by the person or the institution that will be implementing the objective and trying to reach the goal. It needs to be also clearly linked to a climate risk that has been identified in the climate risk assessment to make it most relevant. It needs to be associated with a time frame and a milestone to be measurable, and associated with action and a budget. And in terms of indicators, we looked a bit at this in the case studies, but also through the survey. Well, what is difficult is not to have a false incentive when setting a list of indicators, and just because some data is available associated with an objective, because it might not be the right way to measure progress on adaptation. And so some countries have used and collected the information that is available and draw indicators based on this. Which is not always the most as a starting point. And on the other hand, there are other countries that have tried to establish a comprehensive list of indicators, but for which data might not be available. And so in this sense, when identifying the indicator, what's really important is to make sure that to identify the purpose, is it to identify progress at the national level, at the sectoral level, to make sure it's fit for purpose, and that it's, of course, regularly and timely with timely and relevant and regular data. And perhaps overall, in better understanding what is a good objective for the country and what are the good indicators, there are a number of, more and more countries, and think of the UK, of New Zealand, who have also including in their plan how they are assessing whether the quality of the plan and whether the objectives are fit for purpose, which is another important dimension that countries can look at.
Thanks, Michaela. I think we can still have time. And then there's also a question for Hoon from the floor. So the question is, which governmental departments should be responsible for the adaptation and the measuring of indicators and results?
Well, in case of Korea, well, thank you for the questions. The one of very specific, the adaptation department of the Ministry of Environment is responsible for the developing all the national adaptation strategies. But for the subnational and action plans, the each subnational government is also responsible for their own action plans. But again, the KEI, the Korea Environment Institute, also provides all the technical advices or technical assistance to develop national adaptation policies and strategies. So that again, we now this year we run also risk assessment, the processes for our national risks, and also we also run for the some of technical, so scientific based for the vulnerability assessment. So that will be the kind of very strong base for the setting up the next year of the fourth cycle of adaptation strategies for the national levels. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we may have one last question. We have time. Okay, so the question goes, the person wants to ask how monitoring climate adaptation is tied in together with mitigation. Is there any examples of cross-cutting monitoring for both adaptation and mitigation in your experience? And I don't know, maybe it could be all countries, or maybe Miriam, you may have UK context example, but also others as well. Maybe we can start with Miriam and see if Hoon or Gladys or both may have something to add. Over to you, Miriam.
Sure, I think it's an important question. The challenge is that when we are monitoring adaptation and mitigation, we're looking at slightly different things. So there are definitely areas of overlap. So particularly in, for example, the built environment, but also thinking about the natural environment. And so if we talk about carbon sequestration, right, that we need our woodlands and forests to be sequestering carbon, that means they also need to be not affected by future climate change, by things like wildfires or like drought or changes in soil moisture and so on. So there's definitely areas of overlap between adaptation and mitigation, but what we might measure to understand progress is often slightly different. So we do try and bring it out in our reports, in both our adaptation and our mitigation reports, particularly where there are those areas of overlap. But the indicators that you might use are probably slightly different for each of them.
Thanks. Gladys, do you want to come in, or Hoon?
Yeah, I can come in. Sorry, Hoon.
Okay, lady first.
No, yeah, Gladys, you go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We don't have a specific experience on measuring, the result of something like that. But we have put in our NDC integrated component that looks into some compromises that we both adaptation and mitigation, and this comprise like oceans and forests, etc. Specifically, those areas that are for the environment, and that also put there some compromises around that. So we have to report that now. So we are looking at what we can do to report that, But it's specifically it has been set separately, and not a specific measure or indicator that complies both things, So you can report on the greenhouse gas reduction or captures, and then the what adaptation has achieved with that, but nothing like more specific in that.
Yeah, thank you. And whom?
Yes, I mean, very luckily, KEI under our research group, we have one small research division is working on the mitigation policies. So they working on about NDC, they working on the mitigation policies, and the other actually division is working with the adaptation policies. So very luckily, under our research group, we also share a lot of information, and also we share a lot of policies. So to me, I mean, now, I mean, most now actually low carbon policies is inseparable in the mitigation and adaptation. So now that's why we're researching like a co-benefit the research project about what kind of policy can benefit to the mitigation and adaptation at the same time. Sometimes maybe the proportion will be different, but still we're not trying to develop very specific policies can benefit to the two different things. And also, very luckily, the Ministry of Environment also monitoring or the monitoring the adaptation and mitigation. But I mean, as far as I know, they're still working very together. So now we kind of and then the process of now they're like they're working together very closely. I would say, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. And thanks again to all the panelists. And it's clear that, a lot has been done in different countries, a lot of progress and promising new avenues. But it's clear that much more work is still needed to improve measurement frameworks and to keep going at this. So that's my own takeaway. And for us at the OECD Secretariat, we will, of course, continue this work to identify and develop relevant adaptation indicators. And in terms of the next step in the ongoing work is to do, our plan is to do a deep dive on the agriculture sector. And we hope to report this work in time for COP 30 in 2025. So please stay tuned. And again, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the great panelists, Michaela, Gladys, Miriam, and Hoon, and all the colleagues online who participated and posed all these important, interesting questions to us to enable this panel discussion. And again, for those who are interested in further deep dive and then to find out more about the report, Measuring Progress in Adaptation to Changing Climate. It's freely accessible online through the OECD website and also shared in this Zoom chat. And finally, many thanks to all our participants for joining today and for your good questions. And we look forward to welcoming you at our next Green Talk Live. And wish you a great rest of the week. Thank you and hope to see you soon. Bye.